like, bro, yeah, she got a kid. Look at his back. Oh my god.
What's up, and welcome back to another reaction. This is the man that terrified the FBI, the life of Fred Hampton. One mic history. I think it's the first video we've ever done reacting to you. I think it's the first video I've ever seen from you, just in general. Yeah, I do know of Fred Hampton. I never really read too much into him, which is why I wanted to watch this video. It's kind of get like a better insight of who the man was. I do know that he was like, was he the leader? Like at least one of the leaders of the Black Panther? I'm pretty sure he was like the head guy. I know he was assassinated in his sleep by the FBI. They raided his house in the middle of the night and he shot him in the face like twice or something like that. Took him out. He was organizing the Black communities. He was organizing, but he had like community centers. He was teaching kids. He was feeding poor children in the communities. He was traveling around the country, not just talking to Black folk, but he was starting to unite white folk, starting to unite Latinos. He was just uniting people a little too much. He was stirring up the pot a little bit too much. I do think the Black Panthers kind of had like a socialist aspect, or like they supported communism or something like that. So I feel like that was another reason why the FBI kind of had like a target on their backs. So yeah, this is gonna be an interesting video. Make sure to like button, subscribe, and share, man. If you want to see more of this history-based stuff, let us know down in the comments, man. I'm gonna hop right into it.
And this is One Mic Black History. Today's episode is about the life of Fred Hampton. Hampton was a young, gifted leader with a talent for organizing people who would rise to become chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Without further ado, let's get started. Fred Hampton was born in August 30th, 1948.
Probably break this up into two parts.
And he grew up in Mayfield, Illinois, which is a working class suburb of Chicago. His parents moved from Louisiana as part of the Great Migration. Very early on, he demonstrated natural leadership abilities, and in the summer of 1967, he would become president of the Youth Council for the local chapter of the NAACP. He helped organize a student boycott of his high school, Provisional East High, when Black girls were excluded from becoming homecoming queen. When the Black students protested, the white students responded with violence, beating the Black students with bats and blackjacks. Hampton organized a group of Black students to help fight back. And in response to the violence, the Maywood police imposed martial law and set up checkpoints around the city's Black neighborhoods. Hampton brought in representatives from the national NAACP and helped lead a boycott of Provisional East High, demanding a retraction of martial law. It was during this time in 1968 that Bobby Rush was co-directing a small student nonviolent coordinating committee chapter in Chicago. He had an ongoing relationship with Stokely Carmichael, who was the chairman of the SNCC. As tensions heightened between Stokely and other SNCC members in the spring of 1968, following Martin Luther King's assassination, Stokely would encourage Rush to start his own Black Panther chapter in Chicago. When Rush heard Fred Hampton speak at the Black Leadership Conference headquarters at Chicago's gang, the Black Keystone Nation, Rush recruited Hampton to join the Black Panthers. Then Rush, Hampton, and Bob Brown, Rush's co-director of the SNCC, organized what would soon become the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. In Chicago in the late 60s, gangs were an important political force in Black neighborhoods. None of those were more important than the Blackstone Rangers. From the start in the early 60s, the Rangers focused on community building in addition to their legal activities. As a result, they composed sort of a parallel government on the south side of Chicago, protecting members of their neighborhoods from other gangs and the police, and providing the community with services. By the late 60s, they had swallowed up most of the smaller gangs as part of the Keystone Nation and had more than 3,500 members. In December of 1968, having quickly built a powerful base in Chicago, Fred Hampton entered discussions with Ford, who was the leader of the Blackstone Rangers, about merging the Panthers and the Rangers. The merger promised to boost the Panthers' membership and street presence, and Hampton suggested to Ford that they should join forces, and Ford was interested in this idea of a merger. The FBI saw the potential merger of these two groups as a political threat and sought to foster conflict between those groups. The Chicago FBI felt that spreading false rumors that the Black Panther Party was disparaging Ford might result in Ford taking active steps to exact some sort of retribution towards the leadership of the Black Panthers. As discussions deteriorated, the Chicago office of the FBI suggested to their headquarters that the time was right to provoke the Rangers to take violent action by sending Ford letters to Jeff Ford. The FBI field office suggested that sending letters to Ford rather than Hampton because Ford was more likely to respond with violence. The FBI's effort may have helped prevent a merger between the Panthers and the Rangers, but it did not precipitate widespread violence as they had hoped, because Fred Hampton and Jeffrey Ford had figured out that the government was attempting to create a deadly conflict between the two groups. In 1969, Fred Hampton attempted to initiate Chicago Panthers' first free food distribution. Hampton imagined himself as a modern Robin Hood and appropriated an ice cream truck in Maywood, passing out more than 400 ice cream bars to the neighborhood children. The Maywood police arrested him on charges of robbery and assault, and in the subsequent weeks, the Hampton and the Chicago Panthers organized their free breakfast program for children, which opened in April of 1969. Within 2 weeks, the Panthers had fed more than 1,100 children and drew new community support, making it hard to ignore the political aspect of the Fred Hampton case. During the trial that April, Hampton appeared on a local television show publicizing the free breakfast program and appealing for public support of the Black Panthers. On April 9th, 1969, Hampton was convicted of robbery and assault. Hampton was released on $2,000 bail.
It's really crazy, just like how like entrenched the FBI and the government was, and like trying to like dismantle these groups and keep blacks and like or other minority groups from like really organizing and creating a structural power that can challenge the authority in like these smaller little towns and like neighborhoods and stuff like that, because that's where it begins. Like there's a strong community and we can all band together like that, they can really press to get some things done. So I think they really just fear what that could have like, steamrolled into, what that could have like possibly became. But yeah, this is definitely interesting so far.
Planning to appeal his conviction on the grounds that the newspaper articles about the Panthers during the trial prejudiced the jury. Following the ice cream truck trial and the attention that it brought, Hampton called the Chicago Panthers' first press conference, which he challenged the legitimacy of the state, asserting the high morality of the Panthers' revolutionary programs and calling on the people to mobilize to support the Panthers against this repressive government. Hampton argued that the Black Panthers, not the government, acted in the interest of the people and stated that in our case, it should be taken to the people and the people would not tolerate any oppressive system or force that attempts to jail the very people who are attempting to feed hungry children. Hampton announced that Chicago Panthers attempted to establish community patrols of the police, open liberation schools throughout the city, and set up free clinics. The Chicago Panthers sought to mobilize a broad alliance in support of Fred Hampton. The new Chicago Panthers seized the attention of the Black Panthers national leadership. When Chairman Bobby Seale visited Chicago, he joined Hampton and Bobby Rush in a church mobilization and spoke to an audience of blacks of various classes and of activists of different races, explaining the revolutionary cross-race logic of Hampton and the Black Panthers' ideas. On May 26, 1969,
look at that shit, man.
Sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison for robbery and assault.
How powerful that be?
In 1969, the Chicago Panthers were still small and had garnered very little.
If it proliferated the boundaries of blackness and reached all these other races.
In June of 1968, the Panthers National Office did not officially recognize the chapter until October of 1968, and the first Chicago office did not open until November 1st of 1968. However, In the spring of 1969, their membership exploded. They gathered increasing attention from the national office and local blacks and progressive allies. By the end of May 1969, with their community programs, allied politics, the Panthers were building a strong organization within Chicago. Each member was required to read at least a dozen books, 6 by Mao Zedong, 3 by Malcolm X, 1 by Huey Newton, Francis Fayton, and Karl Marx. In turn, each member had to help the other members understand the text that they were reading, and the reading reflected the Panthers' increased explicit embrace of Marxism and especially Mao Zedong's theory and ideology. By late May, the Chicago chapter was selling almost 8,000 copies a day of the Black Panther newspaper. And on November 1st, 1968, the Chicago Panthers opened their first office. It represented a formidable force within the community, including a handwritten sign with large text that stated Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, and underneath that sign were huge posters of Panthers' most famous individuals like Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, and Eldridge Cleaver speaking, Malcolm X, and Emory Douglas painted a picture of Bobby Hutton, who had been killed in a shootout with police, and Huey Newton on a wicker throne. As the Chicago Panthers grew in number and political strength, the state's efforts to repress them escalated. On June 4th, 1969, the FBI broke down the 2 steel doors of the Chicago Panthers office and proceeded to sack the office and arrest 8 Chicago Panthers. The FBI agents told the press that they had found several guns and ammunition within the office, but the weapons did not violate any federal regulations. Bobby Rush held a press conference about the legal activities of the FBI, and Rush said that the FBI left the office in complete disarray, creating more than $20,000 in damages and confiscating a safe containing $3,000, which the Panthers planned to use to equip a new health clinic that they were hoping to open. On the morning of July 4th, 1969, rank and file members Larry Robertson and Grady Moore were selling newspapers when they saw 2 police officers questioning patrons about the theft of produce from a nearby market. According to the Panthers, the police lined up more than a dozen individuals against the wall and began harassing them. The police maintained that they were simply investigating the report of stolen produce when Robertson and Moore approached, asking them what they were doing. The officers said that they told Robertson and Moore to leave, and they became belligerent, calling themselves protectors of the community. The Black Panther newspaper reported that Moore and Robertson were not armed, but the police told the press that Robertson drew a gun and started shooting at them, and Robertson was shot 3 times by the police, and both Robertson and Moore were arrested on attempted murder charges. On July 31st of 1969, the Chicago police raided the Black Panther offices for a second time. They arrived at 1:15 in the morning following an afternoon rally outside of the Black Panther offices. 24 police cars shut down the front of the Panther offices, and officers attempted to storm the building. Hampton was in jail on robbery charges, and no other Panther leader was in the office at the time. But 3 rank and file members held the police off for 35 minutes until they ran out of ammunition. Eventually, the police shot down the steel door, made their way upstairs, and beat the Panthers with rifle butts, badly injuring the group and arresting them on attempted murder charges. According to the Panthers, the police used gasoline to burn the 2nd floor of the Panther offices, and police claimed that the Panthers fired first, sniping at the police cars, and that the fire was caused by tear gas canisters. By this point, the Panthers and their allies understood that they were under siege and prepared for further raids from the Chicago police. Rank and file members began cleaning and readying guns at the Chicago office and recording the blood types of members, and others passed out cloths to be used, cover their mouths and faces in the event of a tear gas attack. On the early morning of October 4th, the police raided the Chicago Black Panther offices for a 3rd time. The raid was almost a repeat of the July 31st police raid, where officers riddled the front door and walls with bullets. Police set the office on fire, smashed equipment.
Yeah, these niggas are ganging them down themselves, bro.
For the free breakfast.
You see how much they're going out of their way to just try to disrupt these organizations? They ain't tried as hard with the KKK. I mean, they did infiltrate and tore them down from within, and they were they didn't end up being nowhere near as powerful as it possibly could have been in America. But I really feel like it was that it was the Marxist stuff, and then like the ability for the Black Panthers to proliferate just outside of the Black community and then unite other races. That's when they're like, okay, you're doing too much, because now our whole little charade is over, because all these rich elite mother or the people who really control this country, it's like a board game, and they have the board game on our backs. And as long as we bend over and we are obedient and we allowed that game to be played on our backs, and that's as long as that game will go. But the minute all of us stand up, and I mean all of us, that's why I'm trying to get into like the whole other racist things coming together. When we can just embrace the humanity, say Black, white, Latino, whatever, Asian, whatever. We can just all stand up together. The board game will just fall right over and the game's over. The charade's over. And that's why they just had to dismantle it as soon as they could and as quickly as they could and as thoroughly as they could. Because, I mean, you haven't seen a replication of what the Black Panthers were since then. I mean, we have like Black nationalist groups or whatever, but they're proliferating violence towards other ethnic groups, and it's just not the same. You know what I mean? So yeah, this is interesting. This is part one. Depending on how this video does, we'll do part two. So hit that like button, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it. Welcome back to the channel. See you next time. Peace.